Hey everyone, Alex here, and today we're going to be talking about Lomography's Lomochrome Purple in both 35mm and 120 formats. Okay, to start, I'm just going to give some of the technical specifications of the film. The full name of the film is Lomography's Lomochrome Purple XR 100 to 400, but that's way too long, so we're just going to call it Lomochrome Purple because that's what everyone calls this film anyway. This film stock is available in 35mm, 120 and even 110 formats for the few people who still have functioning 110 cameras. This is a color negative film designed for development in the C41 process. If you don't know what that means, don't worry. Your local lab, if they develop color, develop in C41. That's just a given. I should also mention that I'm talking about the second generation of this film stock, the 2019 and beyond version, because I never shot the previous version and I don't think it's available anymore. I don't know how much of a difference there is. Lomography says it's better image quality, less grain, thank God. But I'm only specifically talking about the newer version, which is what you're going to be able to buy now anyway if you try and get this film. The unique selling point of this film stock is the way it shifts colors, and we'll get more into that a bit later because it's easier to show with example pictures rather than just showing charts or listing off colors and how they shift. Lomography say this film can be rated anywhere from ISO 100 to 400, but honestly I recommend not rating it above 200 because it doesn't turn out that well, as we'll see later. I honestly recommend shooting it at 100, maybe 200. The 35mm canisters are not DX coded, so if your camera relies on that, make sure you check what ISO it defaults to when there is no DX code detected, and certain cameras also use the DX code to determine how many exposures are in the canister. Most cameras will default to 36 as far as I'm aware, like my EOS 1V will default to 36, whereas some other cameras will actually measure the tension on the film, and when it reaches the end of the roll it just stops. So like I had a Nikon F100 for a few months, and that camera actually measured mechanically how many shots were left, but when the end of the roll was reached and with some careful winding I was able to consistently get 37 shots with this film. As you can see here, the film base is actually green rather than the kind of orange-brown that you expect from normal color negative film, and this is because it's a negative and green is complementary to purple on the color wheel, so a green film base lends you towards purple colors in your final images. Okay, so my personal experiences with the film. I really wanted to talk about this in this video as my first film review for two specific reasons. One, it's the first film that I ever actually shot. I got I'm gonna butcher the name, Kamiha Smina, one of those Soviet zone focus point and shoot cameras from my dad as a gift. Thanks for the broken camera, Dad. And this was just the first roll of film I picked up. I figured if I was going to do something weird, I would try a more experimental film. And at the time, I didn't know anything about C41 development and ISOs. And I thought, oh, well, if it's a variable ISO film, I'll just shoot it at 200 and get more usable images out of it. That turned out not to be the case for most of the roll, but that was the camera's fault rather than the film. And the second reason I want to talk about this film is because it is certainly a gimmicky film, and I know a lot of people don't like gimmicky films because they take away the fun, but I find that if in the right circumstances, it's absolutely beautiful. I've got some really nice shots out of this film. Some of them are, they're just purple, but with the right light and the right angle to the sun, as I'll bring up later with some examples, you can get some stunning colors in your shots. Okay, so let's talk about some of the positives of this film and see why you might want to shoot it. So Lomography talk about the variable ISO of this film as if it lets you shoot in any whatever lighting situation you happen to be in. But in reality, changing the ISO that you're metering for, and thus changing the amount of light you're giving the film, will actually change the extent of the color shifts. When you shoot more towards 400 ISO, you get a lot more strong purple cast in your image, and the blues aren't shifted too much, whereas when you shoot at a lower ISO, 100, 160, 200, you get more of the stronger shifts in the greens towards cyan, and a lot of sort of not so much red and purple, but the lighter colors like maybe pink will start to shift a lot more at lower ISOs than they do at higher ISOs. So this gives you a bit of creative freedom, especially in 120, I suppose, where the grain is much less of an issue because of the larger negative to begin with. You can play around and see what effect you actually like, and what works for you might not be what works for me. For all I know, you might try this film and love shooting it at 400 and think 100 looks absolutely crap. Another pro of this film is that you can actually use it for portraits because, like I said, reds don't shift too much compared to other colors like your blues, your greens. So you can take pictures of people without their skin turning into some kind of, overly JPEG'd image. This one is a lot more tentative, but under the right circumstances, you can get a look that is somewhat reminiscent of Kodak's Aerochrome film. This is not really my experience with the film. I've never got that look yet. But that's possibly because I've been looking at a lot of Aerochrome shots because I want some, and I can see some stark differences and see where Lomography's Lomochrome Purple doesn't quite match up, but it gives the same general idea. Honestly, lastly, it's just a unique film with a unique vibe and unique style. Like I mentioned in my channel trailer, I like film because it's experimental and weird, and you can do things that you can't necessarily do on digital. I mean, you can shoot Portra 400 and you can get that with a bit of color tweaking on digital, but you cannot consistently replicate the effects of this film stock on a digital sensor, and that brings more of the unique value of film back to me. So now I'm going to talk about some of the negatives of this negative film. Haha, I'm hilarious. The first one I want to talk about is scans, and this is what drove me to scanning my own film in the first place. Lab scans are very hit or miss depending on where you go. If your lab uses an automated scanner but does not have a color profile for this film, the scans come out absolutely unusable. I'll have some examples here on screen. I decided to start scanning my own film precisely to give me control over the scanning process with Lomochrome Purple, red scale film, whatever kind of weird film stock I want to shoot beyond your bog standard Kodak and Fuji color negative film. Lomography says that this newer emulsion gives less grain than the older version, particularly at higher ISOs, and thank Christ for that, because I don't think that it's that usable at 400. There is a lot of grain, especially in 35mm format. I just don't think it looks that good, even without the difference in color shifts. I mentioned that I prefer the color shifts at lower ISOs, but I just don't like the grain at 400 ISO at all. I think it looks worse than Cinestill 800T in 35mm, rated at 800 ISO, or EI 800. And I've been quite vocal about my distaste for that film shot at 800 in 35mm specifically. I can't speak too much about 120 because I haven't shot as many rolls of this film in 120 as 35mm, but I've shot 9 rolls of this film in 35mm now, and about 1 in 5 to 1 in 7 pictures come out with noticeable scratches on them. And I don't think that's from the film itself. I believe that to be from the automated scanning machines. Now, I can't prove that until I actually start developing C41 at home and prove conclusively either way if it's just the way the film comes or if it is something to do with the rollers and the automated scanners. But it feels like the film emulsion in 35mm scratches way too easily, and I've had a couple of nice-ish images actually ruined by that, such as this one. On the flip side, 120 rolls of this film are not exactly perfect either. I find that it's very hard to keep light tight. Lomography says the film isn't sensitive to infrared light, but I think that it is, because I wind the rolls quite tight, same as I would with any other roll, be it Fuji Pro 400H, Portra 160-400, Velvia, Provia, Ektachrome. And this is the only film where I consistently get light leaks on the edge of the rebate in the film. I have an example here to show you on the light table, and here is the inverted version so you can see just how much it's affected. And I never see this with any other film, and my technique is the same, so I can only assume it's the film itself and not something that I'm doing. I'm calling this a con because it is quite unpredictable, but that depends how you view the whole lomographic photographic process. If you like the unpredictable nature, this might be a positive for you. But the angle of the sun to you and your subject actually determines the extent of the color shifts. I have some examples here that show just how much turning 90 degrees while sitting in the same position Two pictures taken less than 30 seconds apart can make such a massive difference in the amount of grain and the color shifts that you actually see here. Both of these images were spot metered in manual mode, so there's no difference in the actual exposure. The difference is solely where I'm facing with regards to the sun. The sun was about 90 degrees to my right in this picture, and then directly behind me in this picture. And it's just an incredible difference. Equally, when taking pictures of foliage, which is something that I think is a strength of this film, I didn't quite put it in the pros section because good for taking pictures of flowers isn't really something that makes a film marketable over any other. But it does give very nice results under the right circumstances when taking pictures of flowers. Like this picture here I took on my Nikon F3. It's one of my favorite pictures I've ever taken of a flower. And the colors are just beautiful. You wouldn't get that with a regular color negative film, even if you tried to mess around with the hue, saturation. And I've tried with 3 layers in total in Photoshop, and maybe I don't know what I'm doing, but I couldn't get it to work. So it's at least not easy to replicate the effect. And I think it's really nice for this picture. I think it's for anyone who just likes a bit of fun. I think it's for anyone who wants to try something different. And perhaps if you aren't as confident, I mean, I disagree with Lomography's claims that the grain is minor and fine at EI 400, but I mean, you might enjoy that. The fact that it can be used quite readily at 3 different ISOs or EIs is a positive, especially if you don't really know what you're doing, or if you're shooting with a point and shoot camera, like Lomography's own range of cameras, where you don't have much control over the exposure. I mean, I'm very anal about spot metering and measuring my exposure. I don't get it right all the time, but for me personally, the variable ISO and the usability of the film when rated at different ISOs or EIs is not so much a positive for me, but it might be for you. Lastly, it's just something different. I keep saying this, and it is because you can use it for plants, you can use it for people. On a bright sunny day, you can get beautiful results with this film. It's just that it's not that consistent. But that might be a positive for you again. So lastly, do I recommend this film? Honestly, yes. I think everyone should at least try one roll of the film just to see what it's like. The results I get might be because I live in Ireland. It might be some combination of our latitude. It might be because of the type of sunlight that we get. You know, based on our position in the world, you might get beautiful results with this film, far beyond what I could ever dream of just by living in a different country. Or maybe you live somewhere where it just turns out to be absolute crap. But I think it's worth a shot, especially because it's not that expensive. I mean, it's cheaper than all of the big color negative stocks at the minute, like Portra 400, and it's similar price to Ektar, where I buy it from. And it's certainly cheaper than Fuji Pro 400H now. So look, all I ask is that you give the film one shot. Just one shot. See how you get on with it. Maybe you'll like it, maybe you won't. This concludes my review of Lomography's Lomochrome Purple XR 100-400 color negative film. If you liked the video, let me know, and if there's any feedback you'd like to give me, please, because I'm still trying to figure out this whole video thing. You don't see the mess of cables on the desk, or the 2 blankets I have propped up on light stands to try and improve the acoustics in this god-awful home office. I'd love to hear whatever you have to say, and if you have any suggestions for a film stock or a piece of equipment that some of you who know me would know I have, that you think I should review next, please let me know. Thanks, and have a nice day.